The moment came like a shadow in the daylight, unexpected but unmistakable. King Robert lay dying, breath labored, ribs rising like broken armor plates under his skin. In that dim, suffocating chamber, Ned Stark held the parchment, the royal decree naming him protector of the realm. But his eyes weren't on the dying king. They were on the High Septon, standing too close, praying too loudly, watching too intently. Ned's instincts, sharpened by years in the north, flared. He should have noticed sooner. The faith was no longer just preaching. They were maneuvering, whispering in the ears of lords, blessing Lannister banners with sanctified oils, forgiving debts from Casterly Rock. The High Septon's sermons had subtly changed tone, replacing prayers with politics. And now, as Robert Baratheon hovered between life and death, the faith didn't just stand by, they hovered, vultures cloaked in robes, ready to crown the son of incest as king in the eyes of the gods. So Ned Stark made a choice. He didn't kneel, he didn't pray, he declared war, but not in fire and blood. Not yet. In ink, in silence, in strategy. He summoned Ser Barristan in secret, sent ravens to Stannis, no longer just warning him of Joffrey's illegitimacy, but requesting aid, military aid. He wrote to River Run, to Storm's End, to the Vale. Even to Pike, though he knew it was a long shot, not to raise arms against the Lannisters alone, but against the faith itself, because the faith was no longer just a religion. It was a weapon, and Ned Stark wasn't about to let his children grow up in a kingdom ruled by robes and whispers. The first sword was drawn in the Sept of Baelor, not in violence, but in refusal. Sir Loras Tyrell, golden and arrogant, refused to kneel before the High Septon during a public blessing ceremony for Prince Joffrey. Not because of personal rebellion, but because word had reached him. Ned Stark was calling for the faith to be cast out of politics, and those who followed the old gods were listening. What happened next shattered the capital. The High Septon demanded obedience. Loras refused. The crowd watched. The Septon raised his voice, calling Loras a blasphemer, idolater, and traitor to the Seven, and Sir Loras, smiling in the way only knights with powerful fathers can, spat at his feet. The Septon ordered his arrest. Sir Loras drew his sword, and within seconds, the Faith Militant, a force long forbidden by royal decree, revealed their rebirth. They poured out from side doors, armored in rusted plate and shining zealotry. Loras was overwhelmed, not killed, but beaten, bloodied, and dragged away before he could cry out his family name. The realm had seen its first blow, and the Northy responded. Ned sent word to Winterfell. Raise the banners. This is not a war of kings. It is a war for the soul of the realm. Robb Stark, still only a boy in most men's eyes, rode to Moat Cailin, not with hesitation, but with a quiet fury. He'd grown up hearing tales of southern games. Now the South had declared war on the old gods. He wouldn't let it stand. In the Riverlands, Edmure Tully hesitated. The faith held sway in the towns, but his uncle Brynden Blackfish had no such doubts. He rode through the countryside, breaking up sermons and seizing septs that held Lannister banners. The Blackfish made war not with proclamations, but with disruption, sabotage, fear. In King's Landing, Cersei Lannister watched with calculated interest. The faith had been useful, but now they were unpredictable. Her golden boy was being used as a religious symbol. And Cersei didn't share power, not with priests, so she did something no one expected. She summoned Ned Stark. They met in the Tower of the Hand, alone. "You want to destroy the faith," she said. "Sipping Arbor Gold, I want to destroy their hold on the throne," Ned replied. "Then perhaps we want the same thing." Silence followed. Cersei offered him a deal. Root out the High Septon, purge the militant, and in return she would cooperate. Not openly. But Joffrey would not be crowned in the Sept. The faith would lose its moment of triumph. Ned didn't trust her, but he didn't need to. He needed time. The High Septon, however, was already moving faster. He declared Ned Stark a heretic. Not just a traitor to the crown, but to the Seven themselves. And in a city that bathed in superstition. That was more dangerous than treason. Overnight, Septons began preaching that the North had fallen to darkness, that Stark men worshipped trees and shadows, that the old gods were demons, that their children bore wolves in their blood. Whispers became curses. Curses became riots. A sept in Flea Bottom was burned down by unknown hands. In retaliation, 2 northern travelers were stoned to death. King's Landing was fracturing, and Ned? He didn't flinch. He opened the gates to the Red Keep for every northerner and riverlander stranded in the capital. He refused to hide. He issued public declarations, calling the faith a second crown hiding behind altar smoke. He challenged the High Septon to a debate, public. On the steps of the Sept it never happened, because the night before the debate, a fire broke out in the Great Sept. Not an accident, a message. The faith was no longer preaching. It was fighting. Okay, pause. Did anyone else feel that tension building? 'Cause here's where it gets absolutely crazy. The faith isn't just mad, they're mobilizing. And if you think Ned's about to back down, you don't know Ned Stark. But wait till you hear what the Eyrie does next. Trust me, this flips everything. Smash that like button if you think the faith of the Seven was always secretly dangerous. And drop a comment. Who would you support in this war, Ned and the Old Gods? Or the faith and the Seven? Now back to the chaos. Jon Royce rides down from the Vale, wearing his bronze armor and his fury like a second skin. The Eyrie had remained neutral, until now. But the faith sent ravens, demanding Lady Arryn condemn her father's old friend, declaring that if the Vale didn't stand with the Seven, it would be treated as a nest of heresy. Lysa Arryn, paranoid and unstable, was terrified. But even she had her limits. The raven she sent back had only 5 words. We kneel to no priests. The Vale's armies began to move, and across the narrow sea, a man in exile smiled. Stannis Baratheon read the raven sent by Ned Stark, one calling not just for kingship, but for war against the corruption of the faith, against the false piety infecting the throne. And Stannis, who had long since abandoned the Seven, found a cause worth fighting for. Fire met ice and Westeros began to burn. Snow blanketed the fields beyond the Blackwater Rush, as if winter had arrived months too early. But the cold wasn't from the north. It was the chill that comes before blood is spilled. Before old gods and new clash, not just in faith, but in fire. The realm was tearing at its seams. Word of Ned Stark's war reached even the quietest corners of Westeros. Septs shuttered their doors. Common folk whispered prayers to both gods, old and new, just in case. But faith, like power, was no longer a matter of belief. It had become a choice. And choices had consequences. The High Septon, no longer content with pulpit power, moved to militarize the capital completely. With gold pouring in from Lannisport and hearts inflamed by fear, the faith militant tripled in number. Men who once prayed now patrolled. Teen boys who had never held a sword now marched in lines. And women, poor, devout, desperate, wielded daggers beneath robes, calling themselves Daughters of Light. But not all in the Crownlands were devout. Sir Meryn Trant, one of the Kingsguard, disappeared one night. The next morning, his head was found at the foot of the Red Keep's gate, a wooden coin of the old gods jammed between his teeth. No note, no warning, just a message. The North has eyes. Ned Stark, still seated as Lord Protector, was tightening his grip, quietly, carefully, brutally. He sent Arya and Sansa away in secret, one with Yoren to the Wall, the other disguised as a Scepter's ward to River Run. He knew the faith would come for his children, not just his crown. He had seen what fanaticism could do. He had seen what it had already begun to do. Okay, real quick, let's talk about this moment. Ned Stark just went full tactical. He's not the honorable fool people remember. This version of Ned, he's playing the game. And he's playing it well. But here's where it goes full Game of Thrones mode. Because the faith makes their move, and it's bigger than anything you're expecting. One morning, before the sun had even touched the Red Keep's towers, bells rang out across King's Landing, not for prayer, but for coronation. The High Septon had crowned a king, but not Joffrey, and not Renly. The name announced shook the capital. Tommen Baratheon, a child, a puppet. Fair boy bathed in holy oil, dressed in white, crowned with a circlet of thorns and gold. The faith claimed Joffrey was tainted, born of sin, unclean by the god's law. But Tommen, young and pure, had been chosen by the Seven, and the city didn't fight it. Not all of it. Cersei was livid. She had backed the faith just enough to keep power, but this was theft. Her son stolen, paraded through the streets as if he was a relic, not a ruler. She confronted the High Septon that very night, her face pale with rage. You crown my child without my consent. The Septon's answer was soft. The gods require no mother's permission. And then a step further, the faith declared Circe unfit. They barred her from court, from the Red Keep, from Tommen. They stripped her of titles, declared her a harlot queen, and ordered her to undergo a public penance. She refused, until she had no choice. The walk of shame came not from a prison cell, but from the steps of the Sept itself, as torches burned and the people screamed. A queen brought low, a capital humiliated, a faith emboldened, and Ned? He watched it unfold from the Tower of the Hand. But he didn't laugh, he didn't gloat, he simply whispered to himself, "The gods are at war, and we are all damned." Meanwhile, in the Vale, Jan Royce met with lords hesitant to move. The Vale had always stayed above the southern chaos. But now the faith was sending demands, ravaging villages on their borders, threatening to cleanse the area of its heathen customs. Royce called it what it was, an invasion wrapped in prayer, so the Vale descended. Not just knights, but falcon banners. Sky-blue shields, silent, disciplined ranks, and with them came a name that hadn't been uttered in years, Jon Arryn's true son. Whispers swirled. Not Robin, not the sickly boy in the Eyrie, but another, hidden, protected. Born of a woman no one dared name, and the faith feared him, because if he lived... Their lies fell. Wait! Did you hear that? The faith just crowned Tommen, and someone's claiming Jon Arryn had a secret son. This is spiraling, and I haven't even told you what Stannis is doing yet. Stick with me. This is where fire meets stone. Drop a comment if you think the faith just overplayed their hand. In Dragonstone, the night was filled with smoke and chanting. Melisandre had seen visions of wolves and fire, of trees bleeding, of a man with honor bleeding out in the snow, but now her flames danced to a new rhythm. War comes from within, she whispered to Stannis. Not across the sea, but within the walls of the gods. And Stannis Baratheon, rightful heir in his own eyes, saw a path, not to conquer with swords, but to cleanse with flame. He declared himself not just king, but destroyer of false gods. Melisandre named the faith of the Seven the Great Deceiver, and Dragonstone prepared for holy war. In Riverrun, the Blackfish tightened defenses. Edmure had bent the knee to Ned, and the Riverlands, torn between gods and survival, braced for siege. Septs in Harrenhal burned. Monasteries in Fairmarket were taken. The faith began executing lords who refused conversion. But the Riverlands had long memories. They remembered the old ways, they remembered the price of kneeling, and they remembered her. A woman moved through the Riverlands, face hidden, hands scarred. She was no priest. She carried no banner. But when she spoke, the air stilled. "Do you remember the Targaryens?" she would ask, and then, in hushed tones, "They burned men for praying to the Seven. Now the Seven burn those who remember the Targaryens. Which is worse?" She called herself Ash, but those who followed her called her Queen, and those who betrayed her, well, no one betrayed her twice. And in the far north at the Wall, Jon Snow received a raven. His father had declared war, not on the south, not on the Lannisters, but on the gods themselves, and Jon knew. The Night's Watch would not stay untouched, because if the faith claimed the south, that the north would be next, and the Wall would burn last. Would burn last. Snow melted on the steps of the Red Keep, though the air held no warmth. The city was shifting, bending beneath the pressure of too many gods, too many kings, and too few truths. Ned Stark had always believed in justice, in honor. But as King's Landing became a battlefield of whispers and holy declarations, he realized honor alone wouldn't win this war. It would need strategy, deception, and yes, even blood. The faith had crowned Tommen. The Vale was marching. The Riverlands were burning. The reach was uncertain. And in the shadows, Varys whispered rumors of a boy with silver hair sailing west under a black banner. But Ned's war wasn't with dragons. Not yet. It was with gods, or men pretending to be gods, and they had just made their boldest move yet. Before dawn, the faith seized the Ironbanks embassy in the capital. Every record, every ledger burned. The message was clear: debts meant nothing if the gods forgave them. In one night, they erased centuries of financial order. The crown's coffers, already strained, collapsed. Gold cloaks went unpaid, food prices surged, and riots followed. Ned stood at the window of the Tower of the Hand, watching flames rise from the Street of Flour. A baker, beaten to death for refusing to sell bread in the name of the Seven. A child trampled beneath feet as starving crowds raided grain stores. This wasn't religion anymore. This was tyranny. And yet, in the midst of chaos, some found clarity. Tyrion Lannister returned to the city in disguise. Escorted by Bronn and a sellsword unit from Essos, he arrived to find Cersei exiled, Joffrey sidelined, and Tommen speaking like a prophet. Unreal, Tyrion muttered, surveying the wreckage. They turned the crown into a sermon. He requested an audience with Ned Stark, and to everyone's surprise, he got one. The meeting was tense. Tyrion sipped wine. Ned didn't touch his. "You declared war on the gods," Tyrion said, eyes glittering. "How's that working out for you?" "I declared war on men pretending to be gods." That always ends well. Ned didn't flinch. "I didn't ask you here for wit. No, you asked me here because your gold is gone. Your allies are nervous and your enemies pray louder than you fight." Tyrion leaned forward, dropping the smirk. "But I agree with you." Silence stretched. "I don't trust men in robes any more than I trust wildfire in a library." "And the faith." "There's wildfire now. So you'll help me." "I'll help me," Tyrion corrected. "And in doing so, I might just help you." "Okay, time out. Tyrion and Ned working together? If that doesn't scream Game of Thrones twist, I don't know what does. But wait until you hear their actual plan, because it involves betrayal, false prophets, and a weapon no one has dared use since the Targaryens fell. Stay with me. This next part, it changes everything. The plan was simple in theory, complex in execution. They wouldn't strike the High Septon directly. They'd strike his faith from within. Tyrion knew of a man, no former brother of the faith, cast out, tortured, forgotten, but not broken. His name was Maelor, and he carried secrets. Tyrion found him in a cell beneath the Red Keep, hidden since Aerys's reign. Maelor had once been the High Septon's rival. Now he was a madman. But madness, Tyrion believed, was just pain no one understood. They released him, gave him robes, gave him sermons, and gave him a stage. Within a week, Maelor was preaching in the alleys. Within 2, in the squares. By the 3rd, crowds gathered. Not for the 7, but for the forgotten flame. His words were dangerous and addictive. They preach light but hide in shadows. They promise peace but drink war like wine. They call themselves gods, but even the gods can burn. The city was splitting again, faith versus flame. But this time, the spark came from inside. Meanwhile, Robb Stark rode for the twins. Lord Walder was aging, bitter, but he respected strength. And Robb brought more than banners, he brought a reason. The faith has never protected the Riverlands, Robb told him. They let your sons die in the Trident. They mocked your daughters behind your back. But fight with me and I'll make your blood count. Walder smiled. And if I don't? Robb didn't blink. Then your house will be the first to fall when they come for the north. The twins joined the cause, reluctantly. But blood had been promised, and Walder never forgot a deal. At the wall, Jon Snow stood in the cold, raven in hand, heart sinking. His father's words were clear. The faith will come for the wall. They see it as an abomination. Old gods, no gods. No oaths to the 7, prepare. Jon looked around. The brothers were few, supplies thin, morale lower than ever. But he had something the faith didn't. Purpose. He called a meeting. Spoke not as Lord Commander, but as a Stark. If the South burns in fire and gods, the wall will be the last refuge of men, and we will hold. And the Watch rallied. For the first time in years, they remembered who they were. Back in King's Landing, the High Septon declared Maelor a heretic. He ordered his execution. But when the faith militant arrived, they found thousands waiting, not with weapons but with silence. Unblinking, Maelor raised his arms. If the gods must kill their own to stay holy, perhaps they are no gods at all. Then, he burned himself alive by choice and the city watched. That moment cracked the faith's image. He didn't scream, he didn't beg, he just burned, and the people began to whisper. If he wasn't afraid of death, what was the High Septon afraid of? And far away on the sea, sails appeared, black with red trim. Daenerys Targaryen had received the letters. Not all of them made sense, but the ones that did. They spoke of gods who ruled men, and a Stark who stood alone against them. She whispered to herself, let the gods burn. I have dragons. Hold on, can we just pause and appreciate what just happened? We now have Ned and Tyrion creating religious chaos from the inside. We've got Robb outmaneuvering the Freys. We've got Jon preparing the war like it's Helm's Deep, and now Dany is coming. She's coming to end then. She's not coming for the throne, War of Gods. Not coming for the throne, War of Gods. The sky above King's Landing was strangely silent. No birds. No bells, no singing, only smoke. Hanging low over the rooftops. Clinking to the stones like breath held too long. It had been 3 days since Mela burned. 3 days since the man who spoke against the gods chose death over silence. And still, the people talked. Not in taverns. They'd all been closed by decree of the faith. Not in markets. They'd been overtaken by the hungry and the hateful. No, they whispered in alleyways. In cellars. In the spaces between sermons. And the whispers always began the same way. What if he was right? Ned Stark watched it all unfold like a slow-moving avalanche. He had hoped that the public defiance of the faith would stir unrest. But this was revolution, and it wasn't under his control anymore. Mela had become a martyr. The people no longer looked to the throne for answers. Not even to the crown. They looked inward, or worse, they looked to whoever shouted the loudest. And the High Septon? He responded the only way he knew how. He declared a holy war. Okay, pause. Because this is where it explodes. Up until now, it's been political maneuvering, psychological warfare, tension in the air. But this is full-scale religious crusade territory. The faith is done preaching. They're about to purge. Now back in from Old Town to King's Landing, every major sept was ordered to raise banners. Not just the faith militant, but volunteer armies from the devout. The High Septon called it the cleansing of Westeros, and their first target. Winterfell. They claimed the north was the heart of heresy, that the gods demanded ice be melted in fire, that the children of the old gods must be reborn in the light of the Seven, and they sent 3,000 men to begin the purge, but they never made it, somewhere near the neck. In the twisting marshes of the Crannogman, the faith's army vanished. No word, no survivors, only a raven feather soaked in black mud. Returned by Howland Reed himself. The message was simple. The old gods are watching. In the south, chaos was multiplying. The Reach had fractured. House Tyrell had sent feelers to both sides. Publicly, they condemned Ned's defiance, but privately, Margaery was writing letters. To Dawn, to the Vale, to anyone who might stop the spiral. Loras Tyrell remained a prisoner of the faith. Beaten, humiliated, but not broken. And within the Sept's prison, Loras had found something far more dangerous than armor. Devout doubt. He'd begun speaking to the faith militant guarding him, not in anger, not in rebellion, but in questions. Why do we kneel to men who've never held a sword? Why must we serve gods who fear questions? And the whispers began again, this time from inside the septs. Meanwhile, on Dragonstone, fire licked the sky. Stannis had begun his march. His banners were fewer than he'd hoped. But Melisandre didn't need numbers. She needed zeal. And Stannis had that in abundance. As they sailed for the capital, the fires of R'hllor burned high on every ship. The faith's propaganda machine tried to turn the people against him. They painted Stannis as a demon worshipper, a butcher, a false messiah. But when his ships hit Blackwater Bay, no one resisted, not because of fear but because of hope. And in the shadows of the city, Tyrion moved again. The dwarf had taken to using disguises, ratty robes, scarred faces, even a wooden cane. But beneath it all, his mind was sharper than ever. He approached Ned with a new idea. The people hate the faith now, and they don't trust the crown. You need to give them something else. Like what? Like a queen, Ned frowned. You mean Sansa? No, I mean Daenerys. Yes, we're going there. Tyrion is setting the table for the Targaryen return. I told you we'd twist the blade. And it's about to go full Dracarys. Smash that. Like if this is the wildest Thrones timeline you've ever heard. And hold on, because Dany's about to land. She didn't come with an army, she came with dragons. One circled King's Landing at dusk. The people didn't scream. They cheered, because dragonfire to them had become less terrifying than scripture. Daenerys Targaryen walked into the capital with no crown, no speech and no demands, just one sentence, whispered to a child on the street. Where they burn you for questioning, I bring fire for answers. And the people followed. The High Septon ordered her. Death called her the whore. Queen called her the final temptation, called her the flame that must be snuffed, but when his men reached her, they didn't find a girl, they found Drogon, and Drogon found them first. The Sept of Baelor burned not from strategy, not from vengeance, but from a scream, one great roar that cracked the heavens and sent holy men running like rats. Tyrion watched it burn. From the Red Keep, he didn't smile, he just said, "We're all in it now." At the same time, in the Riverlands, Robb Stark had made his move. He wasn't trying to win hearts, he was taking castles. House Frey turned fully to his side, buying survival with loyalty. River Run became the staging ground for a second northern army, and in the ruins of Harrenhal something stirred, a letter, left by a stranger, signed only A. It read, "The fire is yours to wield. But beware, it burns friend as fast as foe," and beneath that, a sigil, a black direwolf eating a burning sun. Meanwhile, Jon Snow stood atop the wall watching the North send banners, not against wildlings, not against White Walkers, but against gods. And for the first time he wondered, was this the long night? Not snow and silence, but faith and fire. But faith and fire. The ash hadn't even settled. Smoke still snaked up from the ruins of the Sept of Baelor. Charred stone hissed where holy water once lay. The bells, those eternal bells, had melted into the bones of the faith militant. For generations they had rung in prayer, now they rang in silence, and across the realm every sept, shrine and sanctuary shuddered in terror, because the gods had been challenged, and the challenger had won. Daenerys Targaryen had not stormed the gates. She had not demanded the Iron Throne. She had burned their symbol, and that was louder than any coronation. But if fire had broken the faith's illusion of divinity, it had also birthed something far more dangerous, fanaticism. The High Septon did not die in the flames. He emerged days later, bloodied but alive, claiming the fire had spared him as proof of divine right. His followers called him the Burned Saint. He no longer preached peace. He no longer spoke of the Seven as guides. He now declared himself their voice, and he called for the destruction of the dragon, Witch, the northern heretic, and every soul who doubts. Meanwhile, within the Red Keep, alliances were collapsing faster than walls. Ned Stark stood across from Daenerys. Her silver hair was unbound, her dress scorched and ash-streaked, her eyes unchanged. "I burned your city's heart," she said. "You burned a cancer." Ned replied, "But now the body convulses." They didn't argue like enemies. They spoke like two rulers who knew peace was a luxury no longer afforded. "We cannot let him rally the faith again," Ned said. Dany nodded. "Then we strike first." Tyrion, watching them both, whispered under his breath, "And so the dragon marries the wolf." "Okay, hold up. This might be the most underrated moment of the whole saga. We've seen war. We've seen fire, but this is diplomacy forged in death. The North and the Dragon Queen, not for love, but for survival. And now, they're gonna move as one. Let's go deeper." Word spread faster than wildfire. Winterfell, River Run and Dragonstone had united. Their new banner? A direwolf breathing flame. The people called it the Pact of Ash and Ice, but their enemies called it blasphemy. The Burned Saint wasted no time. From Oldtown he summoned his full force, the largest army the faith had ever raised. Not just zealots and poor men, but knights, nobles, even whole houses who feared a world without their gods among them. House Hightower, their raven to King's Landing was brief. "We will not kneel to fire." In the north, Robb Stark fortified Moat Cailin. Reports told of faith missionaries crossing the neck, preaching to peasants, promising cleansing for those who forsake their ancestral gods. Robb responded with iron. "Send them back in pieces," he told his bannermen, "and send their sermons in flames." The north closed its gates. Its faith was not for sale. Meanwhile, in dawn, something strange occurred. A silent raven. No seal, no words. Just a single strip of cloth, black, soaked in blood and wrapped around a stone. Oberyn Martell stared at it for hours. His daughters whispered of shadows gathering in the Boneway, of priests in white robes offering salvation, of Dornish villages quietly disappearing. Oberyn stood, sheathed his blade, and said, "We march at dawn." But in the east, the flame stirred differently. Viserion, Dany's second dragon, disappeared. No trace, no bones, no witnesses. And then, 2 weeks later, the sky above Old Town screamed. A dragon, not black, not gold, but pale, with wings like parchment and eyes white as milk, flew over the high tower, controlled, trained. The Faith had claimed a dragon. Wait, what? Yeah, that's right. The Faith got their hands on Viserion. The same group that once prayed for peace is now weaponizing dragons. This war? It just leveled up. Let's keep going. Tyrion summoned Ned and Dany to the war room. We underestimated them, he said. They're not praying anymore. They're building an empire. Ned studied the reports. They're uniting the West. They have Old Town, the Arbor, the Shield Islands. They'll cut off food to King's Landing. Dany pointed to the sea. Then we don't wait. She looked Tyrion in the eyes. Take the fleet. Cut off their coast. Starve their gods. And me? Ned asked. Dany looked to him, unwavering. You ride with me. The Battle of Bitterbridge came like thunder. The Faith's army, clad in silver and white, marched north to seize the Reach, but Robb Stark met them halfway with flanking support from the Vale. Steel clashed against steel, arrows rained from the hills, and at the heart of it all, Robb fought like a wolf possessed. When the burned Saints general, Sir Eddin Coldwell, challenged him to single combat, Robb accepted. It was over in 30 seconds. The North fought with fury. The Faith, with fear, and fear lost. But victories come at a cost. As Robb stood in the aftermath, his armor dented and soaked in blood, a boy no older than Bran ran to him, eyes wide, chest heaving. They're marching on the wall, the boy gasped. 10,000 strong. Led by something, not human. Robb froze, and in his heart, he knew. The gods were done playing men's games. Meanwhile, in the crypts beneath King's Landing, Arya Stark returned. No one saw her come. No one heard her steps. But she stood before the tomb of her father, dressed in black, blades hidden, face grim. I came back for the list, she whispered, and the gods just got added, and far, far north. Beyond the wall, the wind carried new sounds. Not growls, not screams, but songs. The White Walkers were singing softly, in a language lost to all but the dead, and with each note. The wall cracked a little more. This isn't just a war of crowns anymore. It's not even a war of gods. It's a war for the soul of Westeros. And next time, it ends or it all burns. It ends or it all burns. Snow fell not gently, but like shards of bone from a godless sky. Winter had arrived, not as a whisper, but as a scream. Westeros, fractured by faith, bound by fire and ruled by no one, now stood on the edge of annihilation. The realm bled from too many swords, too many sermons, and too many secrets. And at the center of it all, marching through ash and snow, stood Ned Stark and Daenerys Targaryen. Not as allies, not as lovers, but as the last hope for a world that had lost its gods. The skies above King's Landing were eerily clear. No dragons, no ravens, just silence. Tyrion stood on the ramparts, arms crossed, eyes narrowed toward the south. They're coming, he muttered. Davos stood beside him. The Faith? No, worse. What comes now doesn't pray. It doesn't speak. It sings. Down in the dungeons beneath the city, Arya prepared. Her blades were sharpened, her list was shorter, but her purpose never clearer. She had come back to kill a god. Okay, pause right there. We're in the endgame. This is where it all converges. The Faith, the North, the dragons, and the dead. If you thought Game of Thrones ended with a whimper, this rewrite ends in pure, unapologetic fire. Let's finish this. The burned saint had taken Old Town. With Viserion now bound in chains of glass and faith sigils, the Faith had become more than belief. It had become a machine of war. He stood in the starry sept, blood dripping from his burned face, and declared, "The gods have shown their will. They do not fear dragons. They ride them." And his army marched south to Dawn, east to Storm's End, north to the Wall. But it was the Wall that would fall first. Jon Snow stood atop the highest tower. Below him, the Black Brothers gathered. The wildlings they once fought now stood beside them. Giants, mammoths. The free folk had returned not to invade, but to fight alongside the living and beyond the tree line. Shadows moved. They looked like men, but they sang like ice cracking, and in the middle of them stood something Jon had only seen once before, the Night King. Only this time, his eyes were not blue, they were white, and burning with the Seven's fire. Wait, what? Yep, you heard that right. The Faith has resurrected the Night King, infused him with the twisted fire of their false righteousness. This isn't ice versus fire anymore. It's fire corrupted versus fire reborn. Let's keep going. At Winterfell, Robb prepared. His scouts had returned broken. The wall had cracked. Eastwatch had fallen. The White Walkers had crossed into the realm, and they bore the faith's banners. Undead zealots, he whispered. The worst of both worlds. He sent a raven to his father. One sentence, the gods ride north. In King's Landing, Daenerys held council. Davos, Tyrion, Arya, Brienne, Gendry, Sam, Jon Royce. Even Cersei, called back from her exile, now stood in their war room. And then Ned Stark entered. He looked around the room, filled with enemies, strangers, survivors, and spoke, "We have no gods, no throne, no claim. We have each other." That must be enough. It wasn't a speech, it was a sentence of survival. They rode at dawn. Dany flew above them on Drogon. Jon led the northern flank from Winterfell. Robb guarded the neck with the Vale's knights. Arya slipped into the Faith's rear lines alone. One blade, no face, and behind it all Tyrion moved the pawns that would decide the endgame. The final battle began not with horns, but with a hymn. The burned saint stood before the gates of Moat Cailin, flames licking his body, arms raised, and sang, "We are the light, the flame, the sword. We are the storm that breaks the north. We are the seven." Then came the silence, and then Drogon fire fell from the sky like justice overdue. The burned saint vanished beneath black wings. The faith militant screamed, and the battle began. Steel clashed against flesh. Flames devoured the righteous. The dead sang even as they burned, and through it all Arya moved like a ghost. A whisper. A vengeance long delayed. She found the High Septon. His robe scorched, face blistered. Chanting still, he saw her too late. "I am the gods," he rasped. Arya answered with steel. "No, you're just next." Meanwhile, Jon met the Night King on the battlefield. But this was no simple duel. This was prophecy. Broken Jon's blade, Longclaw lit with fire. Not from R'hllor, but from rage. From memory. From Ned. From Ygritte. From all the dead the gods had ignored. And with a single cry for the living, he struck. And this time the Night King shattered not into ice, but into ash. When the dust cleared, the realm was quiet. The faith was gone. The seven? Silent. The dragons, free in the thrones, melted. Ned Stark returned to Winterfell. Not as Hand, not as Lord, just as Ned. He walked among the trees, sat beneath the heart tree, and finally prayed, not to gods, but to the family he lost. Daenerys left the capital. She didn't stay to rule, didn't demand loyalty. She vanished beyond the sea with Drogon, seeking peace in the ruins of fire. Some say she died, others say she waits for the next song. Robb became Warden of the North. Arya disappeared again, this time with no list. Tyrion wrote the tale. And Jon? Jon rode into the true North, past the wall, past the trees, past the ghosts, because some men don't need peace, they just keep the watch, and so ended the War of the Faith. Not with a crown, not with a god, but with the truth. Men made gods. Men broke them. And in the end, men saved themselves. In the end, men saved themselves.